The rain on Interstate 70 had erased most of the lane markings by the time Ethan Cole saw the truck lose control. The semi was traveling in the opposite direction when its rear wheels slipped. Its trailer swung sideways, struck the central barrier, and tore through it in a shower of concrete and steel. Ethan pressed the brake before the truck entered his lane, but the wet road gave him nowhere near the distance he needed. The trailer continued sliding toward him. He remembered gripping the steering wheel. He remembered the windshield filling with white metal and reflected highway lights. For some reason, his final thoughts settled on the unfinished rifle lying across the gunsmithing bench in his garage. He had spent 3 weekends machining replacement parts for it and had still forgotten to order the correct firing pin. Then the trailer hit. Ethan felt the car collapse around him, and the world ended before pain had time to arrive. His next memory began with a woman screaming. The voice echoed through a stone chamber filled with candlelight. Someone ordered more hot water. Another woman urged the person on the bed to breathe and push once more. Ethan could smell beeswax, blood, and boiled linen. Cold air touched wet skin, and a firm hand struck him across the back. He screamed. A boy, a woman announced. Healthy lungs, too. Ethan understood her. His body could barely move, his vision blurred beyond a short distance, and his arms seemed too weak to lift. None of that frightened him as much as understanding words that should have been meaningless to a newborn. He remembered the highway. He remembered dying. Now a midwife was wrapping him in rough cloth. The exhausted woman on the bed reached toward him. Dark hair clung to her face and her arms trembled when she lifted them. Give him to me, my lady, you have lost a great deal of blood. I have given birth 5 times before tonight. I know what I can endure. The midwife hesitated only briefly before placing the child in her arms. Lady Weston Draymoor counted each of his fingers, then checked his feet beneath the blanket. Once satisfied, she drew him against her chest and closed her eyes. There you are, she whispered. You made me wait long enough. The words carried more affection than Ethan had expected to receive from anyone in this impossible place. His breathing eased against her warmth. A tall man stood in the doorway wearing a dark military coat. Rain marked his shoulders and a sword hung at his side despite the hour. Lord Roland Draymoor, warden of the Ashcombe March, looked first at his wife and then at the child she held. Healthy, he asked. Strong and healthy, my lord, the midwife replied. Good. He will be named Weston after my grandfather. Roland began to turn away. Come closer, Muriel said. He stopped. He carries your grandfather's name. At least look at him properly. Roland crossed the chamber. He appeared tired rather than pleased, though some of the severity left his expression when he stood beside the bed. He touched 2 fingers to the child's forehead in an old blessing. 6 sons, he murmured. One of them should become the man this march needs. Muriel's eyes hardened, but Roland had already stepped away. At dawn, the soldiers of Ashcombe resumed their drills despite the rain. Muriel remained awake long after the room emptied. She hummed a quiet song from her childhood while holding Weston against her chest, unaware that the infant in her arms understood every word spoken around him. He would spend years making certain no one learned how much he remembered. Ashcombe Hall stood near the eastern boundary of Varel, where cultivated land gave way to dark forests and broken hills. The roads beyond its walls required armed patrols even during summer. Raiders descended from the northern ridges during poor harvests, and beasts wandered out of the wilderness whenever winter stripped their usual hunting grounds bare. The Ashcombe March existed to meet those dangers before they reached the richer territories farther west. Clan Draymoor had held the border for generations. Its history celebrated fire mages who burned raiding parties in mountain passes, knights who held gates after the walls around them collapsed, and battle priests who kept wounded soldiers standing through entire nights. The family's authority rested on that strength. Every Draymoor child grew up knowing that a weak border lord endangered more than his own name. Weston grew up inside that tradition while remembering another world. Ethan Cole had studied mechanical engineering and worked for a company that designed industrial equipment. He repaired engines for enjoyment, machined firearm components in his garage, and spent more money on tools than he ever admitted to his friends. Those memories remained clear as Weston learned to walk and speak. He understood leverage before his tutors introduced the word. He recognized poor load distribution in wooden scaffolding and uneven wear on wagon wheels. Whenever he watched a blacksmith work, part of his mind compared the process with modern metallurgy-controlled heat treatment and precision machining. He hid the source of that knowledge. A gifted child might attract pride or jealousy. A child who spoke confidently about electricity, combustion engines, and materials that did not yet exist in Varel might be accused of possession. Weston had no desire to discover how the kingdom treated children believed to be carrying another soul. Muriel noticed his unusual awareness before anyone else. As a toddler, he stopped fussing when someone explained what was happening instead of merely trying to distract him. At 4, he began reading lessons intended for his older brothers. By 5, he had worked through several introductory mathematics texts. Master Ellard, the household tutor, found him one morning reading a grain storage report left on the corner of his desk. Where did you get that? It was here. That does not make it yours. Weston closed the report. The winter estimate is wrong. Ellard stared at him. You are 5 years old. The calculation assumes every sack stays dry. The eastern storehouse leaks after heavy snow. Ellard took the report from him. Later that morning, he carried it to Percival Ashe, the household steward. Percival reviewed the numbers and compared them with the previous year's records. Well? Ellard asked. The boy is correct. I was hoping I had missed something. You did. The leak. Weston's intelligence interested the household, but no one treated it as proof of his future. In Ashcombe, a child remained unfinished until the rite of calling at 18. The calling determined how a person interacted with mana. Some awakened an elemental affinity. Others gained physical reinforcement, healing, sacred power, wardcraft, or specialized abilities tied to trade and craftsmanship. The strongest callings could elevate a family for generations. The weakest barely improved a person's prospects, until the right Weston was only a clever sixth son. At 7, he spent most of an afternoon beside the estate mill. The water wheels shook whenever the current strengthened, forcing the grinding stones out of alignment and wasting grain. Ostwin the miller had complained about the fault for years. Several craftsmen had attempted repairs, but none lasted through the spring floods. Weston watched the wheel turn, counted the intervals between each shutter, and asked for a wax tablet. The paddles on this side take too much force before the others enter the water, he explained. The wheel twists before the load spreads around it. Ostwin examined the diagram. And you learned this from watching for an afternoon. I watched it for most of the afternoon. The miller adjusted the paddle spacing because refusing a lord's son would create more trouble than wasting an hour. The wheel ran smoothly after the change. Ostwin reported it during the next harvest accounting. Your youngest found the fault, my lord. 10 years that wheel has shaken, and he saw the cause in a day. Roland glanced toward Weston, who sat quietly near the wall. A fortunate guess. Ostwin opened his mouth, but Weston shook his head slightly. The miller understood and let the matter pass. Weston had already learned that Roland appreciated intelligence most when it supported his expectations. Correcting an adult publicly made him uncomfortable, particularly when the adult happened to be one of his older sons. Garrick Draymoor disliked correction even more. Garrick was 12 years older than Weston and had already awakened as a fire mage by the time Weston began formal lessons. His first uncontrolled flare scorched half the training yard, and the story grew more impressive each time it was repeated. He was strong, ambitious, and entirely certain that birth order placed him above criticism. Weston avoided challenging him unless the cost of silence became greater than the likely consequences of speaking. The only other child in Ashcombe who fully understood that calculation was Desmond Vane. Desmond was the illegitimate son of a Draymoor cousin and a chambermaid. His father died without formally recognizing him, leaving the boy as a ward of the household. Percival arranged for him to receive an education because he was intelligent and useful. That education did not grant him a place among the family. At formal dinners, Garrick sometimes ordered Desmond to carry messages, pour wine, or fetch objects already within reach. The tasks themselves were harmless. The intention behind them was not. Desmond obeyed without argument. He had learned early that showing anger only entertained people who already held power over him. Weston first spoke to him properly after a logistics lesson. Master Ellard had spent half an hour explaining a convoy problem to Garrick. The question involved moving grain through mountain roads before the arrival of winter. Garrick's answer failed because he treated every mile of the route as though wagons could travel at the same speed. Desmond sat at the end of the table looking down at his notes. Weston recognized the restraint in his expression. Desmond knew the answer and had decided that offering it would cause more trouble than remaining silent. After the lesson, Weston placed the worksheet in front of him. You solved it. Desmond glanced toward the door. I know better than to say so. Garrick has gone, Master Ellard has not. He went to find wine. Desmond looked down at the map. The final section climbs through narrow roads. The wagons will move at less than half their earlier speed. They need another supply point before the ascent. That's what I calculated. Then why are you asking me? To see whether I missed anything. Desmond studied him before answering. You didn't. They began studying together after that. Desmond remembered laws, family histories, and political relationships with unusual precision. Weston understood mechanisms, mathematics, and physical systems almost instinctively. When their answers differed, they argued until one of them produced proof. Neither resented being wrong when the other could demonstrate why. When Weston was 11, Garrick decided to humiliate Desmond during a dinner held for visiting nobles. He ordered the boy to remain behind his chair, refill his cup after every sip, and cross the hall repeatedly for items servants had already placed nearby. The guests noticed. Garrick made certain they did. Weston waited until his eldest brother began issuing another order, then knocked over a goblet of red wine. It spilled across the table and soaked the expensive sleeves of 2 visiting lords. Weston followed the accident with an apology so prolonged and awkward that every person in the hall focused on him until Desmond slipped quietly from the room. Garrick suspected the interruption had been deliberate, but he could not prove it. 2 mornings later, Weston found several rare engineering books stacked on his desk. Desmond never explained where they came from, and Weston never asked. Their friendship continued quietly. By 15, Weston had stopped questioning whether Ethan Cole had been real. The memories had not faded with childhood. He still remembered the smell of cutting oil, the vibration of a lathe, and the patient voice of his first father explaining why a worn machine part had failed. He missed that life, though the feeling no longer made this one seem false. He loved Muriel. He trusted Desmond. He understood the people who worked Ashcomb's fields and guarded its roads. Ethan Cole and Weston Draymoor had become parts of the same man. Roland noticed his youngest son's intelligence and began building plans around it. 4 of Weston's 5 older brothers had received useful callings. Garrick became a fire mage. Corbin awakened as a magic knight, combining defensive wards with exceptional swordsmanship. The 3rd brother gained physical reinforcement, while the 4th became a battle priest. Edric, the 5th son, received a modest earth affinity and was sent to oversee one of the family quarries. Roland did not openly mistreat him, but after his departure his name appeared in conversation only when reports arrived from the quarry. Weston understood the warning. One evening he approached Roland's study carrying updated mill records and heard voices through the partly open door. With his mind, Weston will go further than the others, Roland said. Percival answered after a pause. Assuming the calling supports what you expect, it will. Garrick has strength, but he becomes impatient. Corbin can command soldiers, though he has no interest in court. Weston sees the whole board. Give him fire command magic or a proper knight's calling, and he could sit on the King's War Council before 30. You are treating a hope as though it were already entered in the records. I have watched the boy for 18 years. He is 17. Close enough. Weston turned around before either man noticed him. Roland believed he understood his youngest son. In truth, he understood the results Weston allowed him to see and the future he had built from them. 2 nights before Weston's 18th birthday, the family gathered for the traditional pre-rite dinner. Roland asked each son to report his progress. Garrick discussed border patrols. Corbin explained improvements to the southern garrison. The others spoke about their assigned duties. Weston was asked last. What should I expect from you at the rite? Roland said. The stone decides the calling. That was not my question. It is the only honest answer I can give. Garrick smiled into his cup. Roland watched Weston for several seconds, then leaned back. You have spent your life preparing. Whatever the stone reveals, preparation will make it useful. Muriel looked down at her plate. The rite of calling took place in the Ancestors' Hall before the entire household, allied officers, and every noble guest present at Ashcombe. Nearly 300 people attended Weston's ceremony. A Coastwatch unit had been training beside Ashcombe's border companies for several months, and some of its officers stood near the eastern wall. Among them was Elara Vance, a 22-year-old water mage whose reputation had reached Ashcombe before she did. Elara and Weston had exchanged only a few words during her stay. She had still noticed him. During military briefings, he sat at the rear of the chamber while senior officers discussed supply lines and beast movements. He rarely interrupted, though his expression changed whenever the numbers were wrong. Elara had begun watching for those moments. The calling stone rested on a raised platform at the center of the hall. Pale veins ran through its gray surface, carrying mana gathered through generations of rites. Right Warden Torvin raised one hand. Weston Draymoor, 6th son of Roland Draymoor, place your hand upon the stone. Weston crossed the hall and pressed his palm against the cold surface. For several seconds nothing happened. Whispers began near the back of the chamber. Garrick's calling had appeared almost instantly. Corbin's had required less than 2 seconds. Torvin frowned and repeated part of the invocation. Mana entered Weston's arm. Until that instant, the right calling had not existed inside him. It awakened all at once, opening an awareness he had no language to describe. He sensed the ash stone beneath his hand. He felt its shape, weight, and density. Hairline fractures spread through its interior. Veins of different minerals crossed one another beneath the polished surface. Tiny traces of metal and sediment remained trapped inside it. The knowledge arrived as instinct rather than spoken information. Weston understood that he could change the stone. He did not yet know how far that change could go, but the possibility was there. The stone could be separated, reshaped, or rebuilt into something with entirely different properties. Amber light spread across its surface. Torvin studied the pattern, and surprise escaped his ceremonial composure for a brief moment. The 12th calling, he announced. Right. The chamber fell silent. A rite could reshape mundane materials into simple forms. Most possessed limited mana and produce work inferior to that of an experienced craftsman. A rite might repair tools in a remote village or shape crude fittings where no smith was available. No noble house celebrated producing one. Several household servants looked at Weston with genuine sympathy. Visiting nobles began whispering. A representative from Clan Voss watched Roland rather than the young man at the stone. Garrick looked relieved. Corbin did not. Elara ignored the reactions around her and watched Weston remove his hand from the ash stone. He did not appear shocked or ashamed. His attention remained fixed on his palm as though the ceremony had revealed something no one else had noticed. Muriel saw it too. Roland rose from his seat and left without speaking. The celebration planned for that evening was cancelled before the hall had emptied. Weston returned to his room alone. He locked the door and closed the shutters before placing several ordinary objects on his desk: a cracked wooden stylus, a copper coin, a small river stone, and a bent iron buckle. The calling responded the moment his fingers touched the stylus. He could sense the wood's grain, the dry fibers around the crack, and the weak points created by years of use. Repairing it would have been easy. Instead, he pictured a steel needle. The transformation began immediately. The wood compressed as its substance changed. The stylus shortened and narrowed until a thin metal needle rested between his fingers. Weston stared at it. The needle was much smaller than the original stylus. The calling had not created extra mass to compensate for steel's greater density. It had preserved what was available and changed the material within that limit. He placed the needle on the desk and touched the river stone. This time he imagined clear glass. The stone softened beneath his fingertips and became a polished sphere. Its size changed only slightly because the two materials were closer in density. Weston felt a small pull on his mana, though far less than expected. He tried the copper coin next, changing both its material and its shape. It became a hardened steel gear no wider than the coin had been, each tooth matching the dimensions in his mind. The transformation revealed another rule. The calling obeyed his understanding. He could create a precise gear because he knew how the teeth should align and how the object was meant to transfer force. When he attempted to imagine a complicated magical component described only vaguely in a book, the power hesitated. It could not fill gaps in his knowledge. Weston touched the skin of his own hand. Nothing happened. He tried again with a living leaf from a potted herb near the window. The calling sensed the water fibers and minerals within the plant, but the material remained beyond his control, while the leaf was alive. A dry, fallen leaf responded immediately. Living matter was protected. Dead organic material was not. Weston continued cautiously. The bent iron buckle became a strip of clean, hardened steel. He removed its rust, corrected its internal weaknesses, and aligned the material for greater strength. He did not need to change one substance into another to improve it. The calling could rebuild a material closer to the best version of itself. He tested several objects, but all were small enough to hold in one hand. Each transformation required physical contact. The power spread only through the material he consciously chose, and the farther it moved from his hand, the less certain his awareness became. A simple change happened quickly. More complicated work required concentration. Converting wood into steel cost more than repairing wood. Creating a precise mechanism cost more than producing a plain bar. None of the tests drained him heavily, but Weston could feel the difference. He placed both hands on the wooden desk and considered transforming its entire surface. The calling answered, but the scale changed everything. His awareness spread slowly through the timber. He could sense the front of the transformation waiting beneath his palms, ready to move outward. Changing the whole desk would take time and sustained concentration. Someone entering the room would also find an iron table where a wooden one had stood. Weston withdrew his hands. He had learned enough for one evening. His ability was not the minor shaping power described in the kingdom's books. It could transmute non-living matter, refine material quality, and create any object he properly understood. Its power was extraordinary. Its limits were already visible. It conserved mass. Dense materials produced smaller objects unless he supplied more matter. Large transformations took longer. Precision depended on knowledge and concentration. The calling required direct contact with the chosen material, and living flesh remained completely beyond its reach. Those limits did not make the ability weak. A pile of ordinary stone could become tools, weapons, or high-quality metal if Weston had enough time and understood what he was making. Broken objects could be rebuilt without a forge. Common wood could become stronger timber, or at greater cost entirely different matter. The ability could transform the economy of a kingdom. It was also registered publicly as the lowest calling in Varel. Weston hid the needle sphere and gear beneath a loose floorboard. Telling Roland might prevent whatever punishment his father was preparing, but it would also turn Weston from an embarrassment into a resource. Roland had already planned his son's future before the rite. Learning the truth would only make those plans more difficult to escape. Weston needed time to understand the calling before giving anyone else control over it. Roland summoned him after moonrise. The warden stood near the study window with his back to the door. "Do you understand what your calling means?" he asked. "I understand what the registry says. The registry is what matters." Weston remained near the door. "You expected something else. I expected a calling suited to what you are capable of. The stone did not take away my mind." "This is not a discussion about intelligence. Then what is it about?" Roland turned from the window. "The Warden's Compact." Weston knew the name. Every ruling family on the frontier held its land through an agreement with the crown, though the details were rarely taught outside legal and political lessons. Clan Draymoor retains the Ashcombe March by proving each generation that its blood remains capable of defending the border, Roland said. At the end of every rite cycle, the calling of each direct son is entered into the proof of line, and mine weakens that proof. A calling below the 6th grants any rival house the right to petition for a review of our holding. Clan Voss. Roland nodded. Aldrich Voss has wanted the southern grain roads for 20 years. The moment your calling enters the family record, he will demand a review. 1 week calling cannot erase generations of service. It does not need to. It opens the door. Once the review begins, Voss will purchase testimony, collect every complaint made against this house, and turn every border failure into evidence that Draymoor has lost the strength to rule. What do you intend to do? Roland looked toward the window again. The law gives me until spring. Weston understood what he was refusing to say. You intend to remove me before then? Roland's jaw tightened. Do not force me to describe a decision neither of us will benefit from hearing plainly. You considered killing me before asking whether the stone might have measured me incorrectly. The calling stone does not make mistakes. It gave the closest answer it understood. Roland looked back at him. What does that mean? Before Weston could decide whether to answer, Percival entered the study carrying several papers. My lord, I have another solution. You were told to wait outside. I waited until the conversation reached the point where delay became dangerous. Percival placed the documents on the desk. The Fangmire Reach has remained without a warden for 3 years. The Crown has requested nominations from every Eastern March. No one wants it, Roland said. No one expects a claimant to survive. Percival opened the first document. If Weston accepts a direct Crown appointment, the Royal Reeve will register him as Crown called. His calling will be removed from the Draymoor proof of line before the spring attestation. Roland read the page. And when Fangmire kills him, the legal problem remains solved. Percival did not soften the answer or look toward Weston for forgiveness. If he succeeds, Ashcombe gains a friendly frontier holding. If he fails, no rival can accuse you of spilling Draymoor blood. Roland remained silent for a long time. Finally, he set the papers down. He leaves within the week. His eyes moved to Weston. You may ask for volunteers. Take whatever supplies the law requires this house to provide. You may expect no one to come. I expect people to value their lives. The appointment was announced during the household assembly the next morning. Percival described Fangmire as an opportunity for Weston to establish a holding in direct service to the Crown. No one listening believed the official wording. By midday, soldiers were calling it a burial with paperwork. Corbin found Weston in the stable yard after the assembly. The last 3 wardens failed, he said. So I've heard. The most recent entered with 40 soldiers. 6 returned. Were you sent to convince me not to go? No. Corbin looked uncomfortable. He had always been the most dependable of the brothers, though dependability had rarely required him to stand against Roland. I came to tell you I cannot go with you. I command the southern garrison. My wife is here and men depend on me. I did not ask you to abandon them. I know. Corbin glanced toward the stable doors. I should have spoken in the hall yesterday. What would you have said? I don't know. Then it probably would not have helped. Corbin accepted that without argument. He held out his hand. If the Reach turns against you, retreat before pride convinces you to stay. Weston clasped it. That sounds almost like concern. It is the most you're getting. Muriel entered Weston's room that evening while he was packing. She carried a wrapped bundle and closed the door behind her. I argued with your father. I assumed you did. He did not listen. I assumed that too. Muriel placed the bundle on the bed. Inside lay an old belt knife and a purse heavy with coin. The knife belonged to my father. The money came from my household allowance. This is too much. It is less than Roland should have provided. She looked around the room at the books, clothes, and small possessions Weston had gathered over 18 years. I have watched you hide since you were a child, she said. I knew you were protecting yourself, though I never understood from what. Weston remained silent. Muriel stepped closer. I saw your face after the rite. Everyone else heard the word rite. You were thinking about something else. I discovered that the calling may be different from what the stone announced. How different? I don't know yet. He was not ready to show her the hidden objects. Keeping the secret from Muriel felt worse than keeping it from Roland, but the fewer people who knew, the safer she would be if his father began asking questions. Muriel nodded slowly. Then learn what it is. Somewhere Roland cannot claim it before you understand it yourself. Her voice trembled despite her effort to control it. When you leave Ashcombe, stop making yourself smaller. Survive Fangmire. Build something there. Return one day because you choose to, not because this family finally decides you have become useful. She embraced him. Weston held her tightly. I will come back. You cannot promise that. No. Then promise me you will not throw your life away trying to prove your father wrong. I can promise that. Desmond arrived the following afternoon carrying 2 packed bags. I'm coming with you. Weston looked at the luggage. You decided before telling me. I thought that would save time. You have no combat calling, neither do you according to the whole kingdom. Fangmire may kill us before winter. Desmond placed the bags beside the door and sat down. If I stay here, I'll spend my life solving problems for people who refuse to hear my answers unless Percival repeats them. I'm tired of it. The words were quieter than Weston expected. Desmond continued after a moment. I don't know whether Fangmire will be better. It may be much worse. At least whatever I build there will partly belong to me. Weston studied his oldest friend. Bring every map and supply record you can find. They're in the second bag. Callum Bryce joined without making a speech. Weston found him in the training yard the next morning, checking the straps on a travel pack while his sword and winter cloak lay beside it. At 31, Callum was considered the finest swordsman serving Ashcombe. He had no noble blood or rare magical talent. Discipline and years of training had made him more dangerous than many men who possessed both. You've already packed, Weston said. Yes, Corbin approved this. I requested reassignment. He approved it. Why? The Kesson ambush. 3 years earlier, Callum's captain had blamed him for losing a supply convoy. Weston, 15 at the time, had remembered the scouting request the captain denied and exposed the altered report before Callum could be punished. You were innocent, Weston said. That did not mean anyone intended to protect me. You owe me nothing. I disagree. Callum lifted the pack. Bring additional bowstrings, Weston said. The reports mentioned constant damp. I already did. Ilara joined through paperwork rather than a declaration. Percival summoned Weston to the steward's office that afternoon to review the crown appointment. Ilara was waiting beside the desk with a transfer request carrying her commander's signature. My Coastwatch rotation ends this month. Frontier law allows a mage to request service under a newly appointed warden. Weston looked toward Percival. The request is legal, the steward confirmed. Her commander objected and then signed it. You barely know me, Weston said. I know what I've seen, which is, you noticed errors in 2 military briefings before the officers presenting them. At the right, everyone else reacted to the word right. You were studying your own hand. Weston said nothing. Ilara continued less dramatically than he expected. I don't know what you discovered. I'm tired of Coastwatch commanders placing me wherever a water mage makes their reports look impressive. Fangmeyer has real problems. I would like to work on those instead. You may leave. I read the reports, and you still signed. Yes. Weston looked at Percival, who offered no opinion. Then welcome to the expedition, Weston said. They left Ashcombe before dawn 5 days later. The family provided 1 supply cart loaded with the minimum provisions required by law. Percival had quietly added several repair tools and 2 extra sacks of grain, though neither appeared on the official inventory. Corbin stood near the gate. Muriel watched from an upper window with one hand against the glass. Several servants gathered around the courtyard pretending to have work nearby. Fade, the old soldier who had taught every Draymoor son his first sword grip, gave Weston the formal bow owed to a departing lord. Roland did not appear. Neither did Garrick. The eastern road carried Weston, Desmond, Callum, and Ilara away from Ashcombe. They reached Hollowmark 3 days later. The settlement had grown around a stone bridge and an old military way station. Hunters, soldiers, and travelers with nowhere safer to go made up most of its passing population. Joss Farrow, the innkeeper, read Weston's appointment papers twice before bringing 4 bowls of stew. No charge. We can pay, Weston said. You'll need the coin. Callum looked around the crowded common room. You know where we're going. Everyone here knows. Joss pulled out an empty chair. The crown says the last warden lost his garrison to beasts. That is only part of it. The supply wagons stopped first. Why? Desmond asked. Because the capital forgot them. Fangmeyer stopped being interesting. How many survived? 6. Joss looked at Weston. You're young for a burial. I'm not planning one. They never do. The innkeeper rose. Eat before it gets cold. They crossed the Fangmeyer boundary on the 4th day. The crown marker had eroded until its seal was barely visible. Beyond it, the road narrowed and the forest pressed closer. Trees leaned over the old route at strange angles. Roots had broken through the paving stones and birdsong faded until the cartwheels and wind became the only sounds. The Quillfangs attacked shortly after midday. 6 beasts burst from the undergrowth, moving low and fast. Dark metallic bristles ran along their backs, clicking together as they charged. Callum drew his sword. Ilara struck the first beast with a coil of water and threw it across the road. The remaining animals scattered around the attack. 2 rushed toward Weston. A 3rd circled the cart toward Desmond. Weston grabbed the wooden side rail. He had tested only small objects in his room. The rail contained far more material, and the nearest Quillfang was already closing the distance. There was no time for caution. Weston pictured a narrow steel spear. The transformation spread outward from his hand. The wood compressed as it changed, the pale rail darkening into metal, while its volume shrank. It detached from the cart as a thinner, heavier shaft with a reinforced point. The work completed in little more than a second. The speed surprised Weston almost as much as everyone else. He planted the spear as the first Quillfang leapt. The point entered its open mouth and emerged behind the skull. The impact drove Weston backward, but the steel shaft held. The second animal twisted toward his leg. Callum's sword opened its side before it reached him. Behind the cart, Desmond threw a knife at the beast circling toward him. The blade struck its shoulder and disrupted its charge. Ilara hit it with another water strike before it recovered. The surviving Quillfangs retreated into the trees. Desmond stared at the spear. That rail was wood. Yes. You turned it into steel. Weston pulled the weapon free from the dead beast. The shaft remained straight, and the point had suffered no visible damage. Alara approached and tested its balance with 2 fingers. "This is better than most military forge work. I knew the shape I wanted." Callum glanced at the missing section of the cart. "How much can you change?" "I've only tested objects I could hold." "That was not something you could hold," Desmond said. "No. It was also the first time I tried to transform that much material quickly." "How do you feel?" Weston examined his mana reserve. The transformation had cost more than every test in his room combined, though he was far from exhausted. "Fine." Desmond looked toward the bodies in the road. "You might have mentioned this before we entered Fangmire. I discovered it the night of the rite, and you decided to tell us after a monster attack. I decided to tell you once I understood it. The monsters changed the schedule." Desmond did not look satisfied, but Callum interrupted before the argument grew. "Discuss it while moving. The blood may attract something larger." They repaired the cart rail using nearby wood rather than sacrificing part of their remaining supplies. Weston touched a fallen branch, aligned its grain, removed its internal weaknesses, and shaped it to fit the missing section. He kept the material as wood. The result felt denser and stronger than ordinary timber. Weston could have converted it to metal, but doing so would have reduced its volume and added unnecessary weight to the cart. The repair taught him another useful lesson. Transmutation was only one part of the calling. By controlling grain density and internal structure, he could improve common materials without changing what they were. A wooden wall built under his hands could be far stronger than one assembled by ordinary carpenters. It would not become indestructible. Wood remained wood, and enough force could eventually break it. Properly aligned, compressed, and braced timber could still withstand far more punishment than nature intended. They continued east. Duskwatch Keep appeared near sunset on the 6th day. The old maps showed a square fortress with 3 watchtowers overlooking the final defensible rise before the interior of Fangmire became unmapped wilderness. The maps were out of date. One tower had collapsed. Part of the outer wall leaned inward, and the gate stood open with darkness filling the passage beyond it. Weston stopped the cart before the final approach. Callum's hand moved toward his sword. "What is it?" Desmond asked. "The tower," Weston said. "There should be birds." The broken stone held no nests. Nothing moved along the walls. A keep abandoned for 3 years should have been filled with rooks, insects, and small animals. Something had driven them away. "We wait for daylight," Desmond said. "We'll be exposed here," Callum replied. Weston studied the entrance. Retreating to Hollowmark would consume most of their remaining food. Camping on open ground would leave them vulnerable to another pack. "We take the gate," he said. Something shifted inside the darkness. A massive creature stepped beneath the arch. It had the body of a bear, the long muzzle of a wolf, and hide the color of wet ash. Old scars split its lower jaw, leaving tusk-like teeth visible even when its mouth was closed. Callum drew his sword. Duskmaw. A second shape appeared behind the first, smaller but leaner. Then several young bodies moved among the rubble of the collapsed tower. "A den," Desmond said quietly. Alara gathered water around her hands. The male Duskmaw lifted its head and tested the air. Its pale eyes moved across Callum and Alara before settling on Weston. It lowered its body and charged. Weston still held the steel spear, but the weapon looked painfully small against the oncoming beast. He dropped one hand to the road. The old paving stone answered his touch. Its structure spread through his awareness. He felt several connected slabs, the dirt packed beneath them, and traces of minerals running through each piece. The amount of material was far greater than anything he had transformed before. A field of instant steel spikes would have been impossible. The mass extended too far, the conversion was too large, and the Duskmaw was already almost upon him. Weston chose something simpler. He focused on the nearest slab and forced its front edge upward, changing the stone's internal structure while reshaping it into a thick, angled barrier. The transformation began beneath his palm and moved outward more slowly than the cart rail had. The road cracked, stone rose several inches. The Duskmaw continued closing the distance. Weston poured more mana into the working, trying to finish the barrier before 1,200 pounds of muscle reached him. The slab climbed higher its surface, compressing into a dense wedge. Callum moved in front of Weston as Alara released her first strike. The Duskmaw crossed the final stretch of road. Weston felt the transformation reach its limit, a heartbeat before impact. Then the beast struck. The massive Duskmaw struck the unfinished barrier before Weston could reinforce its base. The paving slab had risen less than 3 feet when the beast crashed into the sloped stone. Cracks spread outward from the point of impact, but the angle caught the Duskmaw beneath the chest and lifted part of its weight. Its front paws left the road while its hindquarters continued driving forward. One foreleg clipped Callum and threw him sideways. The creature's shoulder struck Weston a moment later, ripping his hand away from the paving and ending the transformation. Weston landed hard enough to lose his breath. The half-shaped barrier collapsed beneath the Duskmaw, but it had disrupted the charge. Instead of reaching Weston with its jaws open and its weight balanced behind them, the beast came down awkwardly among the broken stones. One forepaw found level ground. The other dropped into the space left by the collapsing slab, twisting the leg beneath the animal's body. Callum recovered first. He rolled onto one knee and cut across the tendon behind the trapped foreleg. His sword entered only a few inches through the thick hide, yet the wounded limb folded when the Duskmaw tried to pull free. The beast swung its long muzzle toward him. Ilara struck the side of its head with a heavy lash of water. The blow forced its jaws away and sprayed the road, briefly blinding the creature while Callum regained his footing. Weston reached for the steel spear he had shaped from the cart rail. Then something moved inside the gatehouse. The female Duskmaw emerged from the darkness at a low run. She was smaller than the male, though only by comparison, and she avoided the shattered barrier instead of trying to cross it. Her path took her directly toward Desmond, who stood beside the tilted supply cart with a knife in one hand and no room to use it properly. "Left," Weston shouted. Desmond jumped toward the ditch. The female's shoulder slammed into the cart as she passed. One wheel lifted from the road and the supply bags strained against their ropes. Her jaws closed where Desmond had been standing a moment earlier. Weston seized a loose fragment of paving stone. The piece was small enough to transform quickly. He pictured a short steel spike with a heavy base, forced the image into clarity, and released his mana. The gray stone darkened beneath his fingers. It contracted as its substance became denser, shrinking into a compact metal weapon. He threw it before the female could turn. His aim was poor, but a creature that large presented a forgiving target. The spike entered high in her shoulder. It failed to reach anything vital, but the impact broke her stride and turned her away from Desmond. Ilara struck her across the muzzle with another burst of water. "Inside the gate," Callum shouted. "We forced them through one at a time." The entrance would give them a narrow space to defend, but the male Duskmaw still stood between them and the arch. It dragged its wounded leg free of the broken road and began turning toward Callum again. Weston looked at the shattered barrier beneath his knees. The first attempt had failed because he had tried to move too much material before deciding exactly what shape it needed. Turning the road into steel would take longer, and the denser finished substance would shrink beneath their feet. He kept the stone as stone. Weston pressed one palm against the broken paving and concentrated only on its form. Several fractured pieces fused at their bases and rose into thick points angled toward the wounded beast. The change moved much faster without transmutation. The male charged. Right. Callum stepped aside at the last possible moment. The Duskmaw's injured paw landed between two stone points. Its weight snapped the first, but the second drove into the softer flesh beneath its chest. The creature roared, tried to pull backward, and only forced the stone deeper. Callum struck the side of its neck. His sword cut through hide and muscle before catching against bone. The Duskmaw twisted, almost wrenching the weapon from his hands. Ilara directed a narrow stream of water against the flat of the blade. The pressure forced it deeper. The male collapsed onto its side, still alive and clawing at the road. Weston recovered the steel spear and approached from behind its forelegs. He placed the point beneath the jaw and drove upward with both hands. The steel passed through the throat and into the base of the skull. The Duskmaw's body shuddered once before settling against the broken road. For several seconds, the only sounds were their breathing and the female's low growl near the cart. Weston turned slowly. She stood with his spike lodged in her shoulder, blood running down one foreleg. Her eyes moved from the humans to the body of her mate. A thin cry came from inside the ruined keep. Several smaller shapes shifted among the rubble of the northern tower. The female answered with a deep broken call and placed herself between the group and the sound of her cubs. Callum pulled his sword free and raised it again. "Leave her," Weston said. "She may attack. She has the cubs behind her. If we follow, she will." Callum kept the blade ready but did not advance. The female backed through the gatehouse without turning away. Once she reached the collapsed tower, several cubs gathered around her. She limped through a breach in the northern wall and disappeared into the forest. Callum watched the opening for a long moment before lowering his sword. "Someone faces that side tonight." "Agreed." Desmond climbed out of the ditch. Mud covered one side of his clothing and a shallow cut marked his cheek. He looked at the newly formed stone spikes, then at Weston. "You could have warned me. I was still deciding whether it would work." Desmond stared at him. "That is somehow worse." Weston might have answered, but he noticed blood running down Callum's forearm. One of the male Duskmaw's claws had torn through his sleeve, and every movement of his hand pulled the wound open again. Ilara saw it at the same time. "Sit down. You have a deep wound below the ribs and almost no mana left. I have rested. That is the problem." Callum looked toward Weston, perhaps expecting support. "Let her treat it," Weston said. "Desmond can watch the road while I check the courtyard. You should not go alone. You are the only trained swordsman here. I would prefer not to lose the use of your arm because you refuse to sit still for 10 minutes. Callum's expression tightened, but he sat against the cart and allowed Ilara to clean the wound. Weston entered the gatehouse carrying the steel spear. The passage smelled of wet fur, old blood, and rotting meat. Bones lay in the corners, most belonging to deer and wild boar. Several had been crushed too thoroughly to identify. The female had already left the courtyard. Weston could hear her moving beyond the northern wall, but each sound came from farther away. He did not follow. Duskwatch Keep had been built around a broad rectangular courtyard. A capped well stood near the center. The western barracks had lost half its roof while the old armory opposite it remained mostly intact despite a sagging entrance. One tower still stood at the southern corner. The northern tower had collapsed inward, covering part of the courtyard with stone and timber. A third tower built into the eastern wall had lost most of its upper level. From the road, the keep had looked like a ruin close to complete failure. Inside, Weston saw that most of the foundations remained stable. The walls still followed their original lines and much of the fallen stone could be reused. Desmond entered several minutes later, still holding his knife. Is she gone? For now. He surveyed the courtyard. The crown map made this place look larger. The map included roofs. Yes, I noticed. Weston approached the well and examined the cover. The foundations are better than I expected. You were nearly crushed outside and you are already inspecting masonry. The masonry did not try to eat me. Desmond gave him a tired look. I was worried the Duskmaw had knocked the sense out of you. Apparently this is normal. Callum and Alara entered after the injury had been washed and wrapped. Alara had made a sling from part of her spare cloak and Callum wore it with visible resentment. He studied the northern breach. The female used that opening. Weston nodded. The trail continues north. We should close it, tomorrow. First we need somewhere secure enough to survive the night. They began with the gatehouse. Callum checked the alcoves and dark corners while Desmond dragged smaller bones into the courtyard. Alara washed blood and filth from the center of the floor using controlled streams of water. Weston examined what remained of the entrance. The wooden doors had rotted away. One iron hinge still clung to the wall while the other lay beneath rubble. The old portcullis had collapsed inward, its bars bent and heavily corroded. Restoring any of it would take more time than the fading daylight allowed. Weston chose a fallen roof beam for a temporary crossbar. He placed both hands against the timber and began removing the decay. Rotten fibers separated and fell away while the usable mass compressed into a shorter, thicker beam. He aligned the grain and strengthened the center where it would carry the most strain. The work took several minutes and left him breathing harder than he expected. Callum tested the finished beam with his good shoulder. It will slow something. That is enough for tonight. They blocked the entrance and stacked bent pieces of iron against the crossbar. Anything large enough to force its way inside would bring the metal down with it. Only then did they sit. Their first meal inside Duskwatch consisted of hard bread, dried meat, and water from their travel skins. Nobody trusted the well until they could inspect it in daylight. The smell of blood continued drifting through the entrance. The dead Duskmaw still lay across the road. Callum looked toward it. That cannot stay there. It will bring scavengers, Alara said. Desmond glanced toward the nearly empty supply bags. It may also contain more food than the cart. The others turned toward him. What? Border hunters eat beast meat. I have seen it sold in Ashcombe. Is Duskmaw one of them? Callum considered it. The companies eat it when they kill one far from a supply road. The meat is tough and smells stronger than venison. It is safe if the glands and damaged organs are removed. Ilara stood and brushed dirt from her hands. I can check for corruption. Weston looked from the carcass to the last of the daylight. Then we use what we can. They reopened the gate. Callum had learned basic field dressing during years on the frontier. He showed Weston where the Duskmaw's scent glands lay and warned him not to cut them. Rupturing one would spoil a large section of meat. Alara checked the carcass with magic before they began. Residual mana remained in the flesh, but it was the natural energy of a powerful beast rather than corruption. The meat should be safe, she said. The liver has dark patches. Leave it and anything touching it. They began with ordinary knives. Weston could feel the dead hide and muscle respond faintly to his calling, but the carcass contained too many unfamiliar structures. He understood wood, stone, and metal. He did not yet understand how monster flesh, tendon, and hide carried stress or retained mana. Blindly transforming it would destroy much of its value. Callum handled most of the cutting despite his wounded arm, using his good hand and directing the others when precision mattered. Alara washed the knives and exposed surfaces repeatedly. Weston helped separate the large muscles while Desmond carried the usable cuts into the courtyard. The work was slow, wet, and exhausting. The smell made Desmond retch twice before he managed to control himself. Alara endured it longer but eventually stepped away to breathe near the wall. Even Callum's face had gone pale by the time they finished the first side. Night arrived before they had processed half the carcass. We cannot preserve all of this tonight, Callum said. We take the best cuts first. They sliced the shoulder, back, and hindquarter meat into thin strips for smoking. A small portion was cut into cubes and cooked separately as a test meal. The rest of the usable meat remained in larger sections that Alara moved into the cold water near the eastern stream, sealed inside clean hide wrappings and weighted beneath the surface. It would keep there briefly, not indefinitely. We will lose some, Callum admitted. Then we finish the rest tomorrow, Weston said. If nothing else reaches it first. They removed only part of the hide before exhaustion forced them to stop. The clean section was stretched across a simple frame in the courtyard. Teeth claws and the longest accessible bones were stored separately. Several tendons were washed and hung for future bowstrings bindings and heavy stitching. The fat was kept for cooking, waterproofing, leather treatment, and future soap making. Their travel lantern still had enough oil for a few nights, but nobody suggested using monster fat for light unless they had no other option. The smell alone discouraged the idea. The scent glands, damaged organs, and contaminated tissue were buried beyond the eastern wall. Weston reshaped the soil and loose stone into a deep pit, and Alara washed the road before they closed the gate again. By the time the crossbar returned to its place, all four of them smelled of smoke, blood, and wet hide. They cooked a small piece of duskmaw meat over the fire. Callum ate first. He chewed slowly, swallowed, and waited. "Well," Desmond asked. "Tough. That is not what I meant. It tastes strong, but it is meat." Alara tried the next piece. Weston followed after she showed no reaction. The flavor was gamey and almost bitter, but it was far better than starvation. Desmond stared at his portion for several seconds before eating it. By the end of the meal, no one had become sick. "If we preserve the best cuts," Callum said, "this gives us several weeks. Longer if we hunt and fish as well." Desmond looked toward the smoking rack. "That changes the supply count considerably." "It buys time," Weston said. "It does not solve food permanently." "No, but I prefer counting weeks to counting days." After the tools had been cleaned, the conversation moved naturally toward Weston's calling. Desmond sat across from him near the small fire. "How much did you know before today?" "Very little. You turned a cart rail into steel." "I tested 4 small objects after the rite. A wooden stylus, a stone, a coin, and a buckle. You knew one material could become another. I knew it worked while I was sitting safely in my room. I did not know whether the same transformation would finish quickly during a fight." Ilara emerged while she cleaned blood and filth from the center of the floor using controlled streams of water. The spear formed almost immediately. "I understood the design. The road barrier was different. I tried to move too much stone without deciding exactly how it needed to carry the impact. The second trap worked faster. I only changed the shape. Keeping stone as stone requires less effort than turning it into metal." Desmond glanced around the gatehouse. "Could you transform this whole building? Perhaps given enough time. Turning the walls into steel would also make them contract. We would probably bring the roof down, so the ability can create a metal fortress and destroy it in the same attempt." "Yes, that sounds more like Ashcombe engineering than yours." Weston ignored the remark. Callum asked, "Can it reach through the ground?" "For a short distance. My control weakens the farther the change moves from my hand, and living things, they do not respond." Alara glanced toward the stretched hide. "Dead things do." "Yes, but I cannot improve material I do not understand. I could turn the hide into steel, but then it would no longer be duskmaw hide." Weston stopped there. The others needed practical knowledge, not a lecture covering every possibility. Callum looked toward the blocked entrance. "Who else knows?" "No one at Ashcombe. Your mother. She knows the calling is unusual." "I did not show her." Callum considered it. "Roland would try to bring you back. He would call it correcting an error, and if you refused, someone at Duskwatch would be accused of manipulating him." Desmond answered before Weston could. "The secret remains here." No one made a speech about loyalty. They were too tired, and the decision required nothing more. They divided the night into watches. Weston took the first because he knew he would not sleep. He sat near the gate while the smoking meat filled the courtyard with a heavy scent. Nothing approached. After the others settled, he began testing the calling with materials already inside the gatehouse. He repaired a split block of timber first. The grain aligned beneath his hands, weak fibers compressed, and the crack disappeared. The finished wood resisted Muriel's knife far better than ordinary pine. Next, he changed a stone fragment into a steel chisel. The object shrank as it became denser, but the metal emerged clean and strong. He made a small hinge from rusted iron taken from the fallen gate. Its leaves and pin fitted together correctly. Then he attempted a chain. The first 15 links formed without difficulty. By the 17th, the pressure behind his eyes had begun to build. One side of the link emerged thinner than the other. Weston noticed and continued anyway. The 19th formed at an angle. The 21st failed to close. When he tested the chain, the 17th link snapped and struck his knuckles. Weston hissed and dropped it. His mana reserve remained deep. His concentration had failed long before his energy did. He cleaned the small cut and placed the broken chain beside the hinge. The travel lantern stood near his knee. Its flame flickered behind cloudy glass, and less than half the oil remained. Ethan Cole remembered electric bulbs, copper wiring, generators, and batteries. None of those ideas helped without a source of current. A glass bulb and a filament did nothing by themselves. Weston picked up a smooth stone and changed it into a clear glass sphere. He formed a thin metal lattice inside, following the basic shape of a filament. The object remained dark. He touched it again and pushed mana through the lattice. A faint glow appeared, but it vanished the moment he removed his hand. Weston tried several adjustments. The second lattice cracked. The third produced light but became hot enough to burn his fingers. He set it aside and worked more slowly. The calling could imprint a physical pattern into material, but it did not grant the object a magical function for free. The internal design needed to carry mana the way a wire carried electricity. Weston altered the lattice into a wider network that spread energy through the glass instead of concentrating it in one heated point. When he touched the sphere again, soft white light filled the gatehouse. The glow remained only while his mana flowed into it. That was enough for the first night. Weston did not immediately solve the rest. His concentration had already failed once, and the painful pulse behind his eyes warned him to stop. When Callum woke for the second watch, he found Weston holding the glowing sphere. "What is that?" "A light. I can see that. It has no flame." Callum approached carefully. "How long does it last?" "While I touch it. That seems inconvenient. It is the first attempt." "Does it burn?" "The earlier version did. And this one?" "Not enough to matter." Callum sat near the entrance. "Sleep before you make one that explodes." Weston left the sphere beside him. It went dark the moment he removed his hand. Morning revealed the keep in greater detail. Brush grew between the courtyard stones, and years of rain had stained the walls beneath broken gutters. The partially butchered Duskmaw remained outside, covered with hide and branches to discourage smaller scavengers. They would have to finish processing it before midday. The well became their first priority. Desmond removed the cover while Alara drew water upward with a narrow magical current. The first bucket came up clear but carried sediment from the shaft. "There is no magical corruption," she said. "We still boil it," Weston replied. Desmond dropped a small stone and counted before the splash, deep enough for a dry season. While the water heated, Weston showed them the light sphere. He placed both hands around it and released a little mana. Soft white light spread through the glass. Desmond stared. "You made that last night?" "Yes." "What powers it?" "At the moment, me." Alara held one hand close to the surface. "Almost no heat. The third design spreads the mana better." "Third." "The first stayed dark. The second became too hot." Callum looked toward the cracked sphere near Weston's pack. He left that detail out. Weston removed his hands, and the light faded. "It is not ready to replace anything," he said. "I need a way for it to draw mana without continuous contact." "Can it do that?" Alara asked. "I think so. The keep is full of ambient mana. The pattern needs a way to collect it slowly." Desmond turned the sphere over after Weston handed it to him. "Even if it only works while touched, this would be useful underground, for a few minutes. Feeding it constantly still tires the user." They kept the oil lanterns. The light sphere returned to Weston's pack until he could test it properly. They spent the next several hours finishing the Duskmaw. The second day of butchering was no cleaner than the first, but the work moved faster. Callum directed them while keeping his injured arm in the sling. Alara washed the meat and checked anything suspicious. Desmond cut and carried once he stopped reacting to the smell. They saved as much meat as the racks and cold stream could hold. Several portions had already begun warming near the center of the carcass and were discarded rather than risk illness. They completed the hide, leaving the damaged shoulder section separate. The full skin was too heavy for one person to move, even after scraping. The skull, claws, teeth, and several major bones were stored in the old armory. Tendons and smaller strips of hide were hung to dry. The remaining waste went into the sealed pit. The Duskmaw did not provide endless supplies, but it gave them food, leather, bone, and valuable monster materials that could be traded later. Callum followed the female's trail after the work was finished. He returned through the northern breach before midday. She continued north. The cubs stayed with her. "Did she turn back?" Weston asked. "No." "Then we leave her." Callum looked toward the forest. "If she returns, she will remember us. She also remembers what happened to her mate. That could make her avoid the keep or attack it. We cannot chase every danger that might return." Callum marked the direction on Desmond's map. They never saw the female or her cubs again. The barracks contained the remains of the previous garrison. Half the roof had collapsed over the sleeping area. Rotted bed frames stood beneath the debris, along with torn blankets and broken equipment. Desmond found part of a supply manifest beneath a fallen shelf. He carried the brittle page into the courtyard. 41 people entered with the last posting, he said. 6 horses, 2 months of grain, dried meat, and lamp oil. The Crown report said the garrison lasted almost 6 months, Callum replied. The entries stop after the 5th week. Alara looked toward the collapsed roof. The rest may be buried. The missing pages lay beneath 2 fallen beams. Weston created a support from the remains of a bed frame. He removed the rot, joined the usable mass, and compressed the center before shaping the ends to fit beneath the load. Callum examined it. "This will hold?" "It should." Callum gave him a long look. "Test it first." They placed heavy stones on the brace in the courtyard. It held. Only then did they move it inside. The first beam lifted without difficulty. The second shifted while they cleared debris from beneath it. Weston heard the wood creak. He reached toward the brace and tried to strengthen it while the full weight of the roof was already pressing down. The transformation moved too slowly. A crack opened along the center. "Out!" Callum shouted. They abandoned the room moments before the support split. The beam dropped and dragged part of the remaining roof down with it. Dust filled the barracks. When it settled, several pieces of salvageable furniture had been crushed beneath the new collapse. No one was hurt, but the mistake cost them hours and destroyed material they could have used. Weston examined the broken brace outside. He had compressed one side more heavily than the other. It looked strong on the surface, but the uneven internal stress created a weak line through the center. Desmond coughed dust from his lungs. "You tested it." "Not under the same kind of load." Callum picked up one half of the brace. "You also tried to alter it after the weight shifted." "I thought I had time." "You did not." Weston accepted the criticism. There was nothing useful to argue. The second attempt used two simpler supports instead of one complicated brace. Each was tested beneath gradually increasing weight, with Callum checking the angles before anyone re-entered the room. This time, the beams held. The recovered pages explained the garrison's end. Desmond read the final entries in the courtyard. 22 remain. The southern road has not seen a crown wagon in 11 weeks. 4 requests have been sent to Hollowmark. No answer has returned. He turned the page. The final lines have been written in an unsteady hand. "If this record reaches anyone, tell them the reach did not defeat us. We held the beasts and kept the gate. Hunger did what claws could not. Tell my wife I stayed until there was no one left who could travel." Desmond lowered the page. Callum looked toward the ruined barracks. The official account blamed a winter surge. "There may have been one," Desmond said. "By then the garrison would already have been starving." Weston studied the ration figures. Every allowance had been crossed out and replaced by a smaller one. "We cannot depend on crown wagons." Callum glanced toward the smoking Duskmaw meat. "We have more food than yesterday. That is not the same as producing our own." "Then food remains the first problem. Repairs follow. After that, tools and the road." Alara studied the roofs around them. "You are planning to stay?" "Yes. Even after that nearly buried us?" Weston looked toward the fresh collapse. "Especially after that." Desmond folded the manifest and placed it inside his map case. "If I am managing supplies, I need the authority to stop work that wastes them." "You have it." Desmond seemed surprised. "You did not even argue. You know the stores better than I do. That has never mattered much at Ashcombe." "This is not Ashcombe." Callum leaned against the well. "We will discover whether that remains true the first time he tells you no." "We probably will." Desmond nodded. "Fine." Weston looked toward Callum and Alara. "The same applies to both of you. Callum decides whether a defense plan can be held. Alara decides what her magic can safely do. I will ask questions, but I will not order either of you to promise something impossible." Callum's expression remained guarded. "We'll see." That was enough for now. Food was no longer an immediate crisis, but it still required variety and long-term planning. Callum and Alara searched the eastern grounds while Weston and Desmond inspected the remaining buildings. Rabbit tracks crossed the old drainage ditch and deer had passed near the stream. Callum set snares using wire from the cart. Alara used narrow strikes of water to stun fish without frightening the whole school. They returned before midday with 2 rabbits and 3 fish. Desmond looked from the catch to the smoking Duskmaw meat. "For the first time we may have more food than people." "For the moment," Callum said. Alara placed the fish near the preparation table. "He carried both rabbits with the arm I told him not to use. You could have made 2 trips. I could also have stayed in the forest long enough to attract something larger." Alara stared at him. Callum walked toward the gate before she answered. The officers' quarters showed that families had once lived at Duskwatch. Tally marks covered the wall beside the narrow bed. Desmond first mistook them for a count of days, but the groups matched the reductions in the ration records. 3 horizontal lines had been carved into the doorframe at increasing heights. A date appeared beside each. "A child lived here," Alara said. The highest mark was more than a year old. No later one followed it. Beneath the bed, Callum found a locked chest. The mechanism had rusted solid. Weston restored the internal pieces without changing the original metal, and the lid opened with a quiet click. Inside lay a tarnished signet ring, a braided ribbon, and a small wooden bird. One wing had been worn smooth by years of handling. Callum lifted the ring. "This may identify the warden." Alara picked up the bird, studied it, and returned it beside the ribbon. "Keep everything together." They moved the chest to a dry corner of the southern tower. Weston claimed the old armory as a workshop. The forge had been removed or destroyed, leaving only a cracked base and an opening where the chimney had once stood. Empty racks remained along the walls. They sorted the debris into piles of stone, wood, iron, hide, bone, and materials Weston did not yet understand. The Duskmaw hide occupied an entire section of the courtyard. Callum and Alara stretched it across a stronger frame, while Weston shaped smooth pegs from the monster's ribs. You could turn all this rubble into tools, Desmond said. Yes, then why spend half the morning sorting it? Because changing something twice wastes time. Wood should stay wood if we need a handle. Iron should stay iron if it only requires repair. The hide may be worth more than any ordinary material I could create from it. Desmond glanced toward the barracks. You sound more cautious today. The roof helped. They made basic tools first: hammers, chisels, hooks, nails, and a saw. Weston transformed selected stone fragments into compact steel billets, then reshaped those billets into finished objects. Working in 2 stages took longer, but it allowed him to inspect the metal before creating anything complicated. The saw blade required the most concentration. He stopped twice while forming the teeth and rested until the pressure behind his eyes faded. The finished saw cut through ordinary timber with little resistance. At night, Weston returned to the light sphere. He could already make it glow while touching it. The next problem was keeping it lit without continuously feeding it his own mana. He experimented with a larger internal lattice that reached the glass in several places. Alara helped by showing him how ambient mana moved through the air around the courtyard. It did not flow like wind or water, but it gathered more strongly near stone that had absorbed magic over many years. Weston altered the lattice to collect that background energy. The first attempt glowed for several seconds after he removed his hand, then faded. The second lasted nearly a minute. The third continued for more than an hour before the pattern destabilized and the light began flickering. He did not install it anywhere. For 3 nights, the sphere remained on a stone table in the gatehouse while they watched for heat cracks or dangerous mana buildup. Nothing happened beyond the occasional flicker. Weston refined the pattern again, lowering the amount of mana it drew and spreading the energy more evenly through the glass. The light became steady. Only then did he add a simple metal switch along the base. Pressing it opened or closed part of the mana pathway. It was not intelligent and did not truly understand commands. It functioned because the physical pattern changed when the switch moved. Desmond tested it repeatedly. It needs no oil. No candle. No. How long will it work? I don't know. The internal metal may eventually degrade or the pattern may drift. How long before that happens? I still don't know. Desmond held the glowing sphere beneath his face. You have created a permanent light and seem determined to sound disappointed. I created one light that has survived 3 days. And if it survives 3 years, then it becomes important. Desmond looked toward the dark gatehouse beyond its glow. It is already important here. Weston made 3 more after the design remained stable for another night. 1 was placed inside the gatehouse, 1 in the workshop, and 1 in the southern tower. The 4th stayed on the workbench for continued testing. They kept the lanterns and remaining oil in storage. Depending entirely on an invention less than a week old would have been foolish. The main gate required 2 days. The old portcullis bars were too corroded to restore at their original size. Weston collected stone from the collapsed northern tower and transformed it into additional steel. Each large conversion took nearly 20 minutes. Sweat gathered beneath Weston's clothes despite the cold air. During the second billet, his concentration began to slip. Ilara noticed the change in his breathing. Stop. I'm nearly finished. You said that before the roof moved. Weston removed his hands. A pale line ran through the half-finished billet, where the transformation had not fully completed. Continuing would have left a hidden weakness inside the metal. He sat, drank water, and waited until the pressure behind his eyes faded. Only then did he finish the work. They used the steel for hinge plates, braces, and a locking mechanism. The doors themselves were wood. Weston removed rot from the best surviving roof beams, joined the usable mass, and shaped it into thick interlocking planks. He aligned the grain along the directions that would carry the greatest force and formed internal supports as part of the structure. Callum tested 1 unfinished plank with his sword. The blade cut less than an inch. This is still wood. Yes. A normal axe. It will damage it eventually. A quillfang. It should hold. A duskmaw. Weston looked toward the stretched hide in the courtyard. For several impacts, perhaps. The steel braces are there, so we never need the exact number. They added metal reinforcement to the interface and fitted the doors to the restored hinges. Callum pushed 1 closed. It moved smoothly through the stone arch and settled against the frame without scraping. Fresh timber now showed against the old walls. Smoke rose from the meat racks and a steady white light shone from the southern tower after sunset. The keep no longer looked empty from the road. The unknown observers appeared on the 3rd evening. Desmond noticed them from the tower while Weston and Alara fitted a new cover over the well. There are people on the southern ridge. Callum reached the stairs first. 6 figures stood beyond bow range where the old road curved down from the hill. They wore travel cloaks and carried packs. At least 2 held bows. A thin line of smoke rose farther south. Bandits? Ilara asked. Possibly, Callum said. They are making no effort to hide. That does not make them friendly, Desmond replied. A thin line of smoke rose farther south. The travelers remained on the ridge. 1 stood apart from the others and leaned heavily on a staff. Ilara noticed. Someone is hurt, or wants us to think so, Callum said. Weston studied the distance between the ridge and the repaired gate. Close the doors. Desmond looked at him. They already know we are here. They can see the smoke and tower light. They do not need an open path into the courtyard. Callum nodded. Agreed. They closed the gate and set the reinforced crossbar in place. The light in the tower remained visible, making no attempt to conceal that Duskwatch was occupied. The strangers watched until dusk, then disappeared beyond the ridge. Callum took the first watch. Weston relieved him near midnight. Nothing moved on the road. Shortly before dawn, Weston heard metal strike stone outside the gate. The sound came once. He woke the others before climbing the tower. No one stood on the road. When daylight strengthened, Callum and Weston opened the gate while Alara watched from above. An object had been placed in the center of the road about 50 yards away. It was a broken hunting spear wrapped in white cloth. Dark blood stained the fabric. Desmond joined them at the entrance. That was not there last night. Callum glanced toward Percival. The spearhead had snapped near its base. Teeth marks scored the wooden shaft, and several black metallic bristles had been tied beneath the cloth. Quillfang bristles. A message had been scratched into the wood. 6 alive, 3 wounded. Pack following. A rough arrow pointed south. Callum read the words twice. It could be bait. Yes, Weston said. Alara came down from the tower. It could also be 6 people who will not survive another attack. Desmond examined the tracks around the spear. Only one person had approached during the night. The prints were uneven and one foot had dragged through the dirt. The person who left this was injured. Unless they prepared the tracks, Callum said. Weston picked up the broken spear. Taking wounded strangers into the keep would consume food, medicine, and time. The Duskmaw meat meant they could feed more people now, but the roofs remained damaged and 4 defenders were barely enough for the walls they already held. Leaving the strangers outside would carry its own cost. Duskwatch could not become a settlement if everyone who approached it learned that its gate opened only for the healthy and useful. Desmond count the food and prepare the safest part of the barracks for wounded people. Alara gather what you need for treatment. Callum choose a meeting point that does not lead directly back to the gate. Callum looks south. You have decided to go. I have decided to verify the message, and if the pack is real. Weston examined the black bristles tied beneath the cloth. Then we choose the ground before it reaches us. The broken spear lay on the courtyard table while Duskwatch prepared to answer its warning. Desmond counted their food twice. The smoked Duskmaw meat gave them enough to feed 6 additional people for several days, provided nobody expected generous portions. Alara packed boiled cloth bandages, herbs, and 2 water skins. Callum studied the southern road from the tower and selected an old stone culvert half a mile from the keep as their fallback point. The culvert stood close enough for a fast retreat, but far enough that strangers could not follow them directly through an open gate. Weston spent the morning turning damaged roof boards into 4 light stretchers. He strengthened the grain-formed smooth handles and added narrow runners underneath so one person could drag a wounded traveler over level ground. Desmond watched him stack them. The message said 3 wounded. The person writing it may have been bleeding. You think the number could be wrong. I think carrying an extra stretcher is easier than carrying a person without one. Callum entered the workshop carrying 2 repaired bows and a bundle of arrows recovered from the old armory. The cart stays here. It will slow us among the trees. Desmond tied medical supplies to one of the stretchers. It also carries food. We take enough for the 6 and return before dark. Alara tightened the straps of her pack. We can discuss the rest while walking.